writing to, and he says to him, do not the laws of your native city forbid your circumcised friend, meaning I, Mendelssohn, even to visit you in Zurich? Jews cannot go visit Zurich in this period. How grateful my co-religionists would be if the dominant nation that includes them in the universal love of mankind allows them the unhindered to pray to the Almighty according to the ways of their fathers. They enjoy a most respectable degree of freedom in the state where I dwell. Should they then not be reluctant to contest the religion of the dominant majority? That is to fall upon their protectors on the side that must be the most sensitive for virtuous men. What is at stake here and what's about to happen, and I'm putting this on the back burner, is the issue of emancipation. Within the next 60 years, 80 years, even 90 years, and some even longer, Jews across Europe will become emancipated. Emancipation brings along, obviously, what the French Revolution brings along, that liberty of man and everyone being on equal footing. Now, in the United States, which we put on the screen a little bit with the population, that was never an issue. By the 1790s, Jews in America were like everybody else. In Europe, that came slowly, differently in different locales, with a heavy price. So keep that in mind as we somehow traverse the lecture tonight. I want to go back to that book I showed you last time and show you something fascinating. So if there's anyone here who's listening who has, what should I say, European roots of parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, or even beyond in Europe, especially Eastern, slightly Central Europe, even into the Prussian Germanic, pay attention to what I'm about to show you, then we'll watch this. Let me go back to my favorite website that all of you by now know. Back to Hebrew books. Okay, I'll click on Hebrew books, get the search right up there. There is the one I messed up. So it's Mostel Tevel. I do a search. Now notice the name. You can see it. Maybe I'll enlarge it a drop.
We don't see anything.
Of course not, because I didn't share the screen. You know, you got to share the screen, Lieberman. Mati, thank you. Here it is. Mostel Tevel. Can you pronounce the name? Friesenhuisen, David Ben Meir Friesenhuisen. Okay, I click on the book. And here it comes up. Well, let's read it online. This is the book I showed you. Now here is his David Ben Meir HaKohen Friesenhuisen. An amazing human being, really unbelievable. Born in 1756. And look at the first of the three books that he has here. His first book is about Copernicus and that theory, and I'll come back to that. He had written a book, Klil Cheshbon, which was on mathematics, but here he discusses more of algebra and stuff like that. And then he writes a will, which I'll discuss in a minute. In order to publish this book, Friesenhuisen has to collect money. Now look where who he collects money from, and this is why this book is so interesting. He gets a Haskama. I'll come back to a different one. If I just go to page 7. Here are the Shmod Negidim HaNedivim. The first city that he mentions of the people who have donated money to publish his book, which is basically a book of science, mathematics, and a will. Now, who is this David Friesenhuisen who's writing this book? Now, I don't know if you know the city of Oholi in Hungary. At this point, the chief rabbi of that city is none other than the famous Rav Moshe Teitelbaum, who is known more simply as the Yismach Moshe, who not only gives him money, but bear with me for a second, and here are amazing cities. If you have nothing to do, access this book, and you can find almost every famous city between parts of Eastern Europe, Hungary, what is today Romania, all the way into Poland, Austria, Germany, and you'll find cities in who gave him money. And in every one of these cities, you will find that usually the first person is the rabbi of the city. Okay, now bear with me just a little bit and watch. Let me just get the right page. I believe it was page 16 I need. Look at page 16. Here are more cities. City of Pressburg, Bratislava. The person who's giving him money here is, again, the Gaon of Bet Din. And notice, Gaon of Bet Din in every city. It's the chief rabbi of the city supporting him. This is Moshe. Anybody remember who's the famous chief rabbi of Pressburg? Well, Moshe. Well, hold on. Let me just exactly show you what this is all about. Page 20. Thank you. Now, Eile Divrei HaGaon mi Pressburg. So the famous Chatam Sofer, of whom we'll speak soon, writes an amazing Hakdamah for him. This David Friesenhausen, now if you go on the next page, he actually has a, stop sharing. He also has an approbation from Rav Moshe Teitelbaum, who eventually becomes the head of the dynasty of Satmar. Who is this man? This man grows up in Germany, is born in Germany, in Fürth, where he gets educated in Torah, spends close to 30 years of his life learning and learning and learning, and becomes one of the great young Talmidei Chachamim. He travels to Hungary, spends some time there, but he hears that in Berlin, there's a tremendous amount of wisdom, of Chachma. So he figures, let me travel to Berlin. He comes to Berlin in the early 1790s and immediately runs to the circles of the students of Mendelssohn and Mendelssohn's followers, or the enlightened Maskilim. He meets the fellow that we spoke of last time, Naftali Tzvi Wiesel. Very impressed with him. And he listens to what they have to say. After about 10 years of hanging out in Berlin, he leaves Berlin. And the reason he left Berlin is because he was very upset that a large number of these enlightened Maskilim rejected the oral law. He was not about to give up the oral law. He was going to be impressed by science, which he was, and now comes back to Holy Hungary, where Rav Moshe Teitelbaum is the Av Betin. Not only is he given financial support to publish his book, but he actually sits on his Betin. So this David Freusenhausen is sitting on the Besdin together with Rav Moshe Teitelbaum. Now, Rav Moshe Teitelbaum, who is the head of the Satmar dynasty, at this point had not yet become Hasidic. It was just about to become. It's a whole different, he started out as an opposition. Long story is not for today. And eventually, though, while this David Freusenhausen is part of his Betin, sitting on his court, he becomes the Hasidic Rebbe, of which we'll see in a minute. But he is so upset. Now that he's gone to Germany, what he walked away with is how important secular knowledge is, not just for future generation, but for everybody. You can't be a rabbi, and he writes very clearly about this. You can't study Talmud without knowing the sciences. And therefore, part now in writing this book is to put on the table the notion that secular education should be valued, not at the expense of giving anything up. In fact, he develops a curriculum a little bit later on in life of what needs to be taught to children, to slightly older children, even what needs to be taught to rabbis, like a special curriculum, what a rabbi needs to know, with a full, complete adherence to Torah and mitzvot. Some have labeled him the first modern Orthodox Jew. Here is a person who is not willing at all to settle his commitment to Torah or to Judaism in this sense. Again, I hate the word orthodoxy, but I'm using it, to orthodoxy, but at the same time be fluent in the local language, get an education, and a pretty good one. He actually takes it to the Hungarian government, hoping that it'll eventually get to whoever part of the, this was, I mean, Joseph II, who at that point, I believe, was the Holy Roman Empire. Long story. Sadly, it gets rejected only because the Jewish community would not have the money and the infrastructure to let it function. And sadly, he disappears from history. Who's heard of him? But let me show you something very interesting. It was published about 10 years ago. So again, let me close this, find all the stuff that's on my screen that I lined up. And now let me again share the screen. And if anybody wants a copy of this, it's about 8-9 pages. You can email me at my famous ral4000@AOL, and I'll send you a copy of it. This was published, notice, in the Jewish Educational Leadership, which is an amazing magazine for educators. Comes out of the Lookstein Center in 2010. So roughly 10 years ago. Every issue has a particular topic. This was about ethics. Really, for educators, this is a great, wonderful. And here is an amazing short article called The Last Will and Testament of Rabbi David Friesenhuisen by Levi Cooper. Levi Cooper is one of these young, what should I call them, up-and-coming historians who have made their mark already in the Jewish world. And it's about that third part of this book, the will and testament of this fellow. Okay, so here he gives a little bit of a biography somewhere. Here it is. In Vienna now, in 1820, David HaKohen Friesenhausen publishes his Mostel Tebel. And on the title page, like you saw, the first one deals with Copernicus. By the way, he was the first Jew to really look at that theory and accept it, even though, if you remember, Yashir Mikandia, Del Medigo also spoke of it. The second has to do with geometry, and then the rest is a will, which is kind of interesting. And in this will, he speaks of, and you can see it here, Torah and science, they're complementary, and exactly purposes of languages and why they're important. And then in here, which is kind of interesting, without giving you all the pages in the Hebrew version, one of the most interesting aspects of the ethical will is how Friesenhausen portrays Hasidim, specifically of Rabbi Teilbaum, who's the famous Yismach Moshe. And here, if you can pronounce Hungarian, is the city where Friesenhausen served as a dayan. Without mentioning Rabbi Teilbaum by name, he includes a scathing attack against him. Here he is suddenly revealing what he doesn't like about what the Hasidim were doing. It's writing these amulets, and you can read the entire thing yourself if you really want to. But this person basically disappears from history. An amazing human being, We know so little of him. Here, Levi Cooper has collected some stuff. There was an article or two in Hungarian by some Hungarian scholars who totally misread him and actually made him the founder of the Reform movement. So that was like, okay. Don't ask me to pronounce the name of the journal. It was the Jido Study, whatever Hungarian it was. Anyway, I bring them to you as an example of what is beginning to happen. And he's not, so to say, a German Jew per se. He is steeped deeply in rabbinic learning. And therefore, like, whoa, what, where's this guy gone? He writes this book, published once, it's over there. No one's even, again, just the names of the people mentioned in each city who have donated money is a history unto itself. But okay, be that as it may, published in Vienna, 1820, stays on HebrewBooks.org. Levi Cooper picks it up. A number of scholars, Dr. Schneider Lyman had written about him a drop, and here and there, and that's it, which is so sad. Here's a man who really gave his life for the Jewish people to spread their education and to bring forth, and he dies all by himself at the end of his life, almost sad and forlorn. He tried to make his mark, and that was the end of that. But okay, let's go back to Berlin, and let me share with you something else, and this will take us to a very interesting kind of sad story. Okay, let me pull it up and enlarge it so you could actually see it. I'm sure you all remember from last week the Jüdische Freischule. Now here it is. You can read the German, die Schule. It's Berlin, the Jüdische Freie Chevrat Chinuch Na'arim. This was that school in Germany that the Maskilim, with the help of Wiesel and others, had established. And it functioned, and students came and learned. It was initially supported by some of the wealthiest Maskilic Jews of Germany, a person that deserves his own lecture, not for now, the Itzik family. The Itzik family is what the Rothschilds became in other parts of the world. These were the billionaires, not millionaires. The billionaires of Germany, and they paid for it. But it was on a condition that somehow the school becomes viable financially. Now, I'm not entering the world of Jewish education and budgets and all that, which is always a struggle for every single school. But they came onto a great idea. What was their idea? They will also have a printing press. Now, Ma'asef, that magazine that we spoke about, keeps on writing about the school and asking people for donations, obviously. But why not have a printing press where they can sell books? And if they sell books, then you know what? It'll help pay for the school, the infrastructures, the teachers, for the students who couldn't afford it. If you remember, the whole school started on the premise that everyone could come to the school. So now, one of the things they published is the following. And the background to this is one of the most amazing stories in, call it, Jewish literature. So bear with me as I pull this one up. Actually, you know what? Let me get it on Hebrew books. It'll be more interesting. Okay, so let me share the Hebrew books with you. And you can see my search and how I push buttons. Okay, I click on Hebrew books right there. I'll go to the title. I have it already in here, Besamim Rosh. I press search and 3 come up. This is the one I want, the one published in Berlin, 1793. I'll click on it and then I'll read it online with you. And here it is. So take out your pens, keep notes, you will be tested. Sefer Sheilot Utshuvot, this is the book of inquiries and responses, halachic, of course, the famous Sheilot and Tshuvot that we always speak about. Besamim Rosh, Okay. Misparam, their number is 392 responsa, which obviously is the gematria of the word besamim. Should have realized something was kind of interesting right there. Vehem, but they, who is the author of this great responsa, let me enlarge the drop in case you have a small screen. Okay, not enlarging. Laha Reish Aleph Shin of Rabbeinu Asher, one of the great Rishonim known as the Rosh. Uleshag Dolei Rishonim, there are many more, Zechronam Levracha. Now, they were collected by a great man, I'll just translate, at the time of the great Rabbi Yosef Karo, who collected them in the 1500s, Yitzchak di Molina. Okay, Mazel Tov, Yitzchak di Molina gathered them. And I, whoever I am, you'll see me in a minute, bring them to the printing press with my own pilpul on each of the responses, and I will call my donation of great Torah knowledge of Talmudic pilpul to the Shelot and Shuvot of the great Rishonim, almost all from Rabbeinu Asher. Who am I? Ani Hatzair, I, the young one, Shaul, the son of my master, the great Tzvi Hirsch, Levin was his last name, of Berlin. His father is the chief rabbi of Berlin. So this is his son, Shaul. Okay, now follow me, I believe, on this page. Who gives approbations to the book? Well, his father, of course. Tzvi Hirsch, chief rabbi of Berlin, writes how wonderful and amazing his son is. Right next to it, to your left, you see the great Rabbi Cheskel Landau again, known as the Noda B'Yehuda. Now, to his credit, even though he's writing this, says at the beginning, Ya'an ki bavanatenu harabim. It's now 3 months, he says, that I've been extremely ill and kind of in danger. So I thank Hashem that everything is okay and I'm over this illness. But to make a long story short, I haven't read everything in it. And you're only saying he should have read it. But he didn't. But he doesn't have to read it because they are from the great Rabbeinu Asher, the great of the Rishonim, who needs no introduction, obviously. And if he does, look up Rabbeinu Asher, and we've discussed them so many times. It's the pillars of Jewish law today are based, he becomes one of the pillars. What is this book? So in the introduction, Shaul Berlin says, look, I was in Trieste, Italy, about 9 years ago, and I came across this Jew whose name was Yonah Tzvi, and Yonah Tzvi told me he had a manuscript, and it was from the 1500s, copied by this Yitzchak di Molina. I would love to give it to you, but you can't publish it for 7 years. Okay, why? Who knows? Okay. And I took it from him and I brought it to Berlin and I'm now publishing it. Okay, now let's backtrack a little bit. Who is this Shaul Berlin? Shaul Berlin is the son of the chief rabbi of Berlin, again, Orthodox chief rabbi of Berlin, who had met, by the way, David Friesenhausen and actually given an approbation to his other book, the Klil Cheshbon, the book of mathematics. So keep on listening to his name because his name will come up. The father of Shaul Berlin, the one who was printing this book. But why am I mentioning all this? Because Shaul Berlin by now had really been a person who was a person almost non grata in the Orthodox world. What he had done prior to this is the following. He had, coming from a great family, his father, by the way, was first chief rabbi in London, then he had come to Berlin. His brother actually eventually becomes chief rabbi in London. But he somehow to put it this way, fell under the spell of the enlightened Maskilim in Berlin. And if anyone of the Orthodox, again, I hate the word, rabbinate, insulted anything at all of Mendelssohn or anything the Maskilim were doing, he decided somehow to do something, I'll use the word very carefully, subversive, to get back at them. Now, to make a long story short, one of the great rabbis at the time, an elderly Chacham, Raphael HaKohen of Altona, had written against the translation in German of Mendelssohn, the Beur. Well, you know what? Shaul Berlin says to himself, I'm going to get him back. How can I get him back? Well, this famous Rabbi Raphael HaKohen of Altona had written a book called Torah Yekutiel, the book of Yekutiel. It's a book of Talmudic Pilpul, a very famous book. People still learn it today. It's that famous. Well, he was going to write a book against it. So what does he do? He publishes a separate book called Mitzpeh Yekutiel, and he passes himself off as Ovadia ben Baruch Ish Polonia. Ovadia, the son of Baruch from Poland. Now you go to Poland, find a guy Ovadia, I'll give you 100, I'll give you more than 100. Okay, but all right, something should have been suspect right away. But what does he do? He begins to attack this book, the Torah Yekutiel, and some of the Talmudic comments that this elderly rabbi had made. Very disrespectful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By the way, the book eventually gets burnt. That's how bad it was. People just could not stomach this book. But somehow it gets revealed that who is this person? The son of the chief rabbi. He denied it and a whole bunch of other stories, but people were very suspect of him. He decides through this other book that he's now publishing that this book will get him back into the good tracks of orthodoxy by showing off what a great Talmudist he is. Because here he's publishing the responsa of the great Rabbeinu Asher, and he will comment to each one of them. So if you bear with me again one more time, I think I still have it up there. Let me just open it up on any other page, and then I'll share it with you. Let's just see if it's one of those pages. Yeah, okay, here it is, share screen. Here is Rabbeinu Asher ending off. This one is to one of his sons. That's the way the response I read. Avichu Asher ben Harav Rabbeinu Yechiel. That was Rabbeinu Asher's father. And here comes his commentary, the Kisa the Harsana. And he starts to write his own comments on what Rabbeinu Asher said, proving it, disproving it, finding similar ideas, different notions. And the book is published by this school in order to bring money. That is great excitement in the Torah world. A book of response of Rabbeinu Asher. Rabbeinu Asher had died in the early 1300s. Who wouldn't rush to buy this? Now in Berlin, it didn't sell very well. One historian actually studied it. I think only 297 copies were sold, but I'll say only, but 297 copies for those days is a local bestseller, trust me. Anyway, everyone wants to have this book. And the minute they open it, as they say in Yiddish, och and vey, this can't be Rabbeinu Asher. There are responsum in there where something is wrong. The most famous one that gave it away, like something's very strange here, was Rabbeinu Asher was asked about, can one commit suicide? If one is really depressed, how should he deal with suicide? And Rabbeinu Asher seems to say, well, well, maybe in that case, uh, which was something, wait a second, suicide and Jewish law are not that simple, but okay. And then you begin to see shades of what you would call modern maskilic notions, like forget kitniot and issues like that. But what happens if a Jew is stuck uh, traveling on Shabbat and he hires a particular carriage to take him somewhere, and he only has money to travel part of the distance, not the entire distance, and he would have to travel partially on Shabbat or on Shabbos. Should he take charity and rely on the community, or should he not burden everyone with his needs and just be Machal Shabbos? And you can guess what the answer is. And things which until then were like, wait a second. So what is in this book is clearly maskilic ideas. There are so many, I'm not even embracing women who are in a state of nidah, etc. It's shaving when shaving would not be allowed by Jewish law, etc., etc. And like you wonder, why is he writing this book? Well, some of the questions are clearly meant to poke fun at the entire enterprise of asking rabbi questions, because some of the questions are ludicrous. And like you wonder who would send such a question to a rabbi, and the rabbi would actually bother answering it. And here's Rabbeinu Asher answering this book. One of them goes like this. It's Pesach, and this elderly Jew has no teeth. Must he eat a kazait of matzah without teeth? Okay, if you're a pure halachist, you begin to wonder about such questions. Yeah, what would happen, like the learning, but that's not what this book was about. Some great rabbis, without getting into who, most famous, Rav Mordechai Bennett, who will come to for a different reason soon, immediately realizes something is wrong with this book. So rabbis begin to write to the father. Are you sure your son actually found this manuscript? Is it possible he made it up? In fact, just let him admit that the manuscript was not his, and we'll let it go. The father sides with the son. And books were written against it, actually. But here's the upside of all this. You can go into a good Torah library, and the book is still there. And you will have people, and I've argued with some of them quite seriously, but no doubt in my mind, this book is a forgery from beginning to end. But it made its inroads into Jewish law. To mention one, Rabbi Yosef quotes from this book. And of course, he'll say, well, could be that some things were added in there and those questions may be unreliable. Others said, Dvarim tovim sheyeshba, the good ideas that are in here are wonderful for the seichel, keep it. Personally, to me, the book is what they call in laws of muktzah machmas mius. This is clearly as wonderful as we might look to maskilim. And some were wonderful people who believed in being, so to say, committed but pushing an agenda of modernity and secular studies. Wonderful. But when you get to be subversive in this way and you want to push the agenda of what you're doing by poking fun and breaking barriers, which are really, beyond menschlichkeit, at that point you begin to lose. Yet, the maskilim were very happy with him. Sadly, again, he's driven out of town, so to say, dies all by himself in London, actually, where he left a will in which he basically said, whoever finds me, he was all alone, I feel so sad for him, whoever finds me and finds my suitcase of writings, please destroy all my writings. and bury me in exactly what I'm wearing right now. And as they say, kachava, that's exactly what happened. And Shaul Berlin came, made his mark. This printing press printed it, and the book went out there. But it didn't get traction, yet it did get some traction. So all this is a product of what is fermenting and happening in this part of the world right now. There are people who believe in their cause at any cost. And there are people who feel, hey, I believe in this, but let me find a way to pass it, so to say, ahead, push the envelope, but push it in a way that's acceptable and nice and normal. Having said all this, let's now put the Besamim Rosh aside. And let me take you somewhere else. Let me do a comparison, do a compare and contrast of two people. So let me show you the first person first. Okay, let me minimize this. Bear with me. I apologize. I believe that most of you will recognize this person. And if not, you can see his name right under there as soon as I share the screen with you. Okay, here he is. No, he's not. Here he is. Okay. This is the great Chassam Sofer. Okay, you can say Chatam Sofer, just don't say Chatam Tofer. Okay, the famous Chassam Sofer, and that's what I'll call him. You can actually see under there, Moshe Schreiber, the Oberrabbiner of Pressburg. Okay. Now, an amazing human being, and I cannot for a second not point out that a real lecture, at least an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, would be proper to discuss the Chassam Sofer, who he was. The influence in the halachic world and in halachic literature is huge. He is monumental, as was the Noda B'Yehuda. The third of these pillars is Rabbi Akiva Eger. These three, Rabbi Akiva Eger, the Chassam Sofer, and the Noda B'Yehuda, are the pillars of modern, so to say, I don't mean modern in the sense of modern orthodoxy, but modern in the sense of the modern period of the great halachic decisors, the great poskim. Now, the Chassam Sofer was born in Frankfurt of Main, and for his entire life, he signed his name Moshe from Frankfurt, even though he's there for about 20 some years, but then leaves. Eventually, he becomes the chief rabbi in Pressburg, in Bratislava, and his life and his legacy is multifaceted. His life alone is multifaceted. And just listen to what he sounds all about, and then the next person you're about to meet and what he's all about, because they're pretty contemporaneous. Now, the Chassam Sofer studies with a very famous person who too needs like an hour at least, the famous Rabbi Nathan Adler, or Reb Nosson Adler as he was known, who was the chief rabbi of Frankfurt. Whoever was his student forever owed this Rabbi Adler his life and spoke of him highly. The Chassam Sofer, no less, followed him literally day and night. And even when he no longer was around him, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, would write in glowing terms of him, even though on some points he disagreed with him. Now, this Nosson Adler was a little bit, what should I call him, unusual for his place and time. Because what he did, which got him in hot water, is, number one, it seems he instituted Birkat Kohanim in his shul in Frankfurt every day. He adopted in Frankfurt Nusach Ari, which is, for those of you who don't know, let's say what Chabad davens today, more or less, a Sephardi type of davening. In addition, he also pronounced Hebrew in the Sephardi way. Any Sephardi Chacham that would come from Frankfurt would spend time with him and he would question him. Yet again, he was a master at the Talmud and Jewish law and all that. The Chassam Sofer is in love with him. But eventually, like all good things, because of these things, the community in Frankfurt is not happy with him, with Rabbi Adler. He leaves, he gets a position in the city of Boskowitz, and the Chassam Sofer actually follows him. A very poignant story, which I'm skipping over. But in traveling there from Frankfurt to this city, the Chassam Sofer goes along with his Rebbe, and they meet some great people along the way. So the Chassam Sofer in his early 20s, I say in his late teens and early 20s, meets the Noda Yehuda and everyone else all the way from there through Vienna. They meet people, they see the Chassam Sofer will always write of how he passed through Vienna and saw how wealthy the community was and all that. Comes to the city of Proznitz, where in the early, must have been about 1802, 18 something, the Chassam Sofer gets married. And he marries an elderly widow, by the way. Sarah Yervitz was her name. And he's sitting and learning, teaching, always teaching, a couple of students and learning. It gets financially hard. So he says, look, I know that we need to support. First position that comes up in the rabbinic world, he decides to take. It was in a place called Dresnitz. And there too, he gets paid. He's not yet world famous, but he has students. And slowly the word gets out of this Moshe Sofer, Moshe Schreiber. And eventually he gets a position in the city of Mattersdorf. And he becomes the rabbi there, and by now he's famous. Some of his Sheilot and Tshuvot, some of his responses have traveled. People have heard of him. The people who studied with him for a year or two spread the word about him, and lo and behold, the Chassam Sofer is out there. But in 18-something, well, 1806 maybe it was, he gets invited to Pressburg, and he accepts. Now, Pressburg was not Mattersdorf as far as the population. It was a huge city. But in Pressburg, there are Maskilim. And the Chassam Sofer comes to Pressburg and gets involved immediately into fighting what he calls the innovators. He's not, and this is very important to remember, he's not against secular studies. It's not the most important thing, but he's not against it. Never was. He clearly writes about it. He's not a Hasid, not part of the Hasidic movement. In fact, he's written a number of things against the Hasidim. Yet, there's a couple of things he likes about them. Eventually, though, the Hasidim adopt him and his writings, and to this day, they study them vehemently. In his days, in Pressburg, is the actual first recorded serious machloket within Orthodoxy about kitniot, which is maybe one day we'll have a lecture about. It's kind of interesting. I've never lectured about that, so maybe one day, maybe before Pesach, the actual beginning of kitniot issues. Not that it's going to go anywhere at the end of the day anyway today, but miyodea, just to know the information. And then sadly, 1812, his wife dies. And within a couple of months, he marries the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eger. Now, Rabbi Akiva Eger is roughly about a year and a half older than him, and they live almost, I think, to 1838. Rabbi Akiva Eger, I believe, and Chassam Sofer, I believe, dies in 1839. Marries his daughter. And with this daughter, he has a number of very famous children. And to make a long story short, because I see I still want to do that one other comparison. He absolutely has taken on not only the Maskilim, but all the things which were coming out of Hamburg, Berlin in the early 1800s of the Reform movement, the Chassam Sofer will stand up like a tower, and we'll discuss them in detail next week. But he started a dynasty, and he was basically, and I can say this with assurity, we today look for, and that's part of what we're doing, we're looking for together for the seeds of modern Orthodoxy. This David Freusenhausen was a seed, it didn't grow much. Where are the seeds of modern Orthodoxy that are actually growing? You still don't see them yet. But the Chassam Sofer is beginning to to form and actually set boundaries to orthodoxy. I say that very carefully, to our orthodoxy today, not modern, not neo. Orthodoxy today, its shape, its boundaries were set by the Chassam Sofer. Having said that, and running out of time, let's do justice to one more great person. So we'll say goodbye to the Chassam Sofer and say hello to, let's get him up here. Okay, do you remember him? Okay, this is Rabbi Isaac Bernays, Rav Yitzchak Bernays, born in 1792, lives till 1849, passes the Chassam Sofer about for 10 years. I don't know if you've ever met him before. Isaac Bernays deserves a lecture also for a number of hours. Let me share with you what was written about him. He was an unbelievable, actually, I'll condense it quickly. Imagine at the age of 7, for those of you who are of German descent and know what the title of Chaver, to make someone a Chaver in the Yekisha community is an honor that takes years. At the age of 7, Isaac Bernays was given the title of Chaver. This was a child prodigy in every single word. He studied in the city where he was born, the city of Würzburg, together with the great Avraham Bing. Keep that name around because we'll come back to it. Avraham Bing was his Rabbi, great Chacham. And here he is in Germany, studying and studying. But he studies secular studies too. And if you looked at his picture, and I'll show it to you again, he was an amazing Orthodox in every way, who took on the reform just as strong as the Chassam Sofer did. But look at how he's dressed. These are known as the canonicals, clearly coming out of what the other clergy was wearing in Germany, non-Jewish clergy. But this man, in his 20s, sitting on the Bezdin, okay, he is on the Betin of Hamburg at the age of 20 already. What a Dayanim. He actually writes in German an article criticizing the book of Gesenius, if you've heard of Gesenius, one of the first lexicons of the Hebrew language. He took him on and disagreed with him and wrote this article in German, published in a Protestant periodical. An Orthodox rabbi sitting on the Bezdin, pulling this off. By the age of 29, he's made chief rabbi of Hamburg. Chief rabbi of Hamburg at the age of 29. That's the largest kehillah in Germany, more than Berlin. There were 6,000 Jews here. And eventually he takes over that school that we mentioned last time that Moshe Frankfurter had started, Rav Hirsch's grandfather. He takes it over. His drashot are in German. Did you hear me? He is the first rabbi in recorded history to not speak in Yiddish, spoke in Hamburg, in the Orthodox Gemeinde in German. He wore canonicals, as you've seen. He also And all Orthodox rabbis who speak every single week today, never done before. Study the history of Darshanim. Rabbis didn't speak every week. They spoke, here and there a couple of times a year. Shabbat Shuvah, Shabbat Hagadol, etc. He introduced the sermon every week. It was an astounding sermon and all that. Here are two rabbis, the Chassam Sofer and Rabbi Isaac Bernays. They both will take on the reform movement. One will really get out there and figure it out and do. Rabbi Bernays, and this is what I'll start with next week. Even though he fights it, he's not able to do much. In Hamburg, they're going ahead and doing what they're doing. He tries, but his success is in a very different area. He took over that school and he taught the young people of Germany for the next generation. And who are two of his most famous students? Samson Raphael Hirsch, who was a student of Isaac Bernays. And so was Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, if you've heard his name, but if not, that's okay. We'll come back to him next week. And Rav Hirsch, for the rest of his life, will absolutely always recall with trembling and fear, with a tremendous amount of awe and respect, what he had learned from Isaac Bernays. This amazing human being who still does not yet have a biography. And there's one tiny mystery about him, which I'll share with you next week. And what I want to do next week is speak a little bit of what happens next, not in Germany, because by now, as we're traversing from the 1700s into the 1800s, Napoleon is showing up. And you might remember that Napoleon presses modernity on the Jews in a very strange way through the assembly of a Sanhedrin in 1806 in Paris. And what was that all about? And how will that form modern Orthodoxy? Join us next week. Thank you, everyone. By the way, have an amazing Thanksgiving to Hashem for us living in this country. And I don't know if you're doing turkey or shmurkey or whatever, that's your business. But again, thank you so much. And I will stop right here.
Rabbi?
Thank you.
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lieberman?
Hi,
Hey.
Ethan.
Thank you.
Hi, Rabbi. I'd like to have a link to the thing about about David Friesenhausen. I actually did put him on a Kahila link site. I'll send you that link so that you can see I did not forget him. And I'd like to add the link that you just showed me because it'll add to what I have there.
Okay, you got it. I have your email, not to worry.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, actually, if you want to see your books, oh, actually, it's dark upstairs.
My
Your
shelf.
shelf is upstairs. Okay, next time I'll put the lights on, okay?
All right. Enjoy.
Jerry, good to see you.
Rabbi, what language were Sephardic Chachamim speaking? I assume they were not speaking in Yiddish when they were giving drushes.
No, but they were doing Hebrew with the Havara Sfardit.
Their speeches were in Hebrew?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Some of them might have been
more
Arabic,
rabbinic Hebrew than modern Hebrew, but yes.
not in vernacular Arabic.
Might have been a form of Udesmo, depending of where they were, throwing in, Turkish or Greek or Italian, whatever they happen to be.
Oh, by the way, Mrs. Einsberg, you should check out that book because there's lots of cities, and I'm sure you'll recognize some names and maybe some
In which,
related to some tombstones.
which book?
The Mostel Tevel book.
Yeah, I incidentally try something different. Put in beta.hebrewbooks.org.
Okay.
It's a different format, but you might like that.
Yes,
Yeah,
I'll use it once in a
I
while.
pulled that up while you were mentioning it. So, yeah,
Okay.
very
Thank
good.
you so much.
Is he after Hillel Lichtenstein?
I'm sorry?
Is Bernays after Hillel Lichtenstein or before?
Before.
He's
I
before,
believe
okay.
before. I'll check
So
it out.
Hillel Lichtenstein was a reaction to him?
A little bit, but I really need to refresh my memory on that one. But I think he was a drop later.
Mayor Hildesheimer and Kalbach, were they also students of Isaac Bernays?
No. I'll come to them because the other person that gets in here is Hildesheimer. Yeah, for sure. So Hildesheimer, I'll speak about. Yeah, but Ettlinger is here related somehow too, and Abraham Bing and Hassam Sofer. Okay, whatever. Anyway, I don't want to go over time. I've kept you, for some of you on the other side of the world, for a long. It's time to go to sleep. Thank you, everyone, and have an amazing week. And next week, let's meet in Yerushalayim.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank
Happy-
you.
Thank you.
Next week, I hope I won't forget like I did last week. Okay, be well.
Henry,
Bye-bye.
you're forgiven. Okay, be well.